Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Ostler. My guest in my home on this beautiful summer day is my friend Jody England Hansen. Welcome to the podcast, Jody.
Thank you, Richard. I'm thrilled to be here.
About 6 years ago, when I stepped in the space of trying to better support LGBTQ Latter-day Saints, there were some people already in this space that were active LDS and saying kind things about gay people, and Jody was one of those. And I realize Jody's mentoring to me in this space and in my life has been very helpful. There's others, but I recognize I could be a committed Latter-day Saint and support LGBTQ people. And so I'd like to publicly thank Jody for her good influence in my life and the wonderful woman she is. And this podcast, having her on the podcast is probably 5 years overdue. Should have had her on the podcast multiple times, but I just kept getting this impression to reach out to Jody, to have her tell part of her story, but also to talk about her father, Eugene England, who is somebody 6 years ago I didn't know. And somebody that passed away in 2021. That's
2001.
2001. So that's 21 years ago.
Yes.
And that's Jody's father. A couple biographies have been written about him that have come out last year. We're going to talk about those. But he is just an incredible member of our faith community. And these biographies and Jody's stories about him will honor him. But the real reason I wanted to do this podcast is there may be younger members of our church, millennials, Gen Zs, Gen X. I guess there's two gens if I can keep stretched.
For now, I'm sure there are more.
That may lean a little more liberal, a little more progressive, and just may feel tension as Latter-day Saints and some of the issues you face. And I realize there's been people that have walked this road long before I've walked this road or long before you've walked this road that need the long view of somebody like Jody and her father to help you navigate this road with the current issues you're addressing as Latter-day Saints. And so that's our hope, is that bringing Eugene's story to you and his two biographies, as well as Jody's own story as a committed Latter-day Saint, that will help you as you're making your way forward. And if you're somebody that's not feeling any tension or any concerns, that you may be listening to this podcast, have better tools or better insights to understand why some deeply committed Latter-day Saints do have concerns and tension at times within our faith, and to create space for them and to value their opinions and feelings. And that's part of creating Zion. Is that okay for an introduction?
Yes, that sounds great.
So I will just, a couple things we'll link to in the podcast. There's two biographies that will come up, one written by Kristine Haglund, one written by Terryl Givens, both about Eugene England. We'll link to both of those so that you can check out those books if you'd like to buy them. The other thing we'll link at, and I'm sure Jody will talk about this, is eugeneengland.org, which is a one-stop place for all of Eugene's work. And so I encourage you to check out that, and we'll talk about that during the podcast. But for that, I'll just turn it over to Jody to start sharing your story.
Thank you, Richard. I'm used to on podcasts kind of following questions. So just kind of break in anytime you want me to redirect. But your request to just kind of share some of my childhood, often people will, when they come to me and say, how is it that you can sit with these contraries? How is it that you can sit with this dissonance? And I guess it's really the way I saw my whole life, people doing that there is no such thing as a place where you will not experience humanity, you will not experience dissonance, you will not come up against contrary things where you thought it would be one way, but people behave or things turn out a different way. And that is so integrally linked to my experience as LDS, my Mormon experience, my heritage. All of that has always been very complex. It was never whitewashed. It was never presented as you are descended from pioneers and they were all wonderful and perfect and you should be like them. Every story about family included ridiculous things and noble things. And every understanding, every discussion about church history was complex. There was this acknowledgement that Joseph Smith made huge mistakes and that he also revealed incredible conversations and questions, and that there were so many people involved in that process. And some of those things spoke to me from a very young age. And I think part of it was that I had parents, and I'll speak very specifically about Dad, who had from early years himself seen and wrestled with deeply powerful, inspiring aspects that came about because he was asking questions because of the model of our restoration. And also, wait a minute, how does that fit in? And so wrestling with dissonance was really the water we swam in. And not that it is ever easy. I don't think it's supposed to be. And one of the essays that is one of my favorites that is on eugeneengland.org is his last published essay. It's The Weeping God of Mormonism. And this experience of seeking and having a relationship with a God that weeps for us, a God that loves us so completely that it's not that they are not mourning because we sin, but that we hurt each other, and that there is not any aspect of God that would impose their will to stop us, but that they will still sit with us and weep with us in the midst of that. It's a really compelling aspect of seeking some kind of a divine presence and being that we follow. And inevitably, humanity is going to find a way to package it and market it in a way that's easy and understandable or compels us to be a certain way. And I think one of the most amazing things, and I love that from early on, this is a very big part, is one of the most revealing things we have in the Doctrine and Covenants is that conversation that God has in section 121, where they're saying, you want me to take revenge on those who are hurting you. We don't work that way. We can't. The only way God's power works is through love and persuasion and compassion. And the moment, not eventually, but the moment anyone is doing anything through force or intimidation or revenge or fear, that is not God. And in that sense, it's attached to the power of the priesthood in God's work on the earth. And I think a lot of times we turn to the human aspect of that rather than the God aspect of that. And that was such a big part of what is linked to things that draw me to this restoration gospel is our discussions like that from an early time. I think I really appreciated the way Dad respected me from an early age. He taught me how to read with the Book of Mormon. And that's not an easy thing to do, a parent to sit with a child and work out how the words sound. And inevitably, I went from sounding out the words to going, wait a minute, what does that mean? So even at a young age, there was never well, I'll tell you what it means and then you won't have ask questions about it. It was more like, what do you think that is saying? And if it was saying something where it didn't make much sense, there was never well, this is the way God works. It's like, well, there are a lot of other people involved in this. Do you think maybe they're saying something about themselves more than they are about God? And so from an early age, this understanding, any community, any faith community, any political, any family, it involves humans. And to never assume that just because something is in the scriptures or being said at conference, this is what God would say. More along the lines of this is where God asks us to wrestle with finding how people are trying to work through this journey. And that he was fine when it was hard. I could say, well, that I don't like that. And he could say, yeah. And you don't need to believe anything about God that suggests God doesn't love everyone. And so when there were things that said that were suggesting people with skin color or people who didn't agree with Nephi or something were somehow inherently evil, there was never the question that God actually felt that way. It was more, wow, this is a story about wrestling. This is a story about people trying to justify themselves. This is a valuable thing to study. And well, I see many people really struggle because they think it has to be completely true and they have to believe it before they'll find value in it. I appreciate learning that the value is in the wrestle. That you can sit in church next to someone that you know you would be yelling at a political rally, holding different picket signs, but you are both there trying to find God in your life. And that's part of the wrestle. Can you serve together to feed people who are hungry, even though you vote very differently? I don't always do well with that. But even Dad took me to my first political rally. To him, activism is inherently connected to faith and dedication to Christ. And so he took me to my first rally when I was 8, and he'd have my siblings and me pass out flyers in canvas neighborhoods even before then. And this is in the 60s in the Bay Area. He was at Stanford and taught at Berkeley as well. But basically it was, if you saw a problem, especially if it concerned discrimination or injustice for others, as a follower of Christ, you needed to heed a call to do something and make a difference. And so that was very much a part of things from an early age. And they were always, they were just one of many in the community that would host regular discussions and firesides in their home. That was so prevalent and was until there was a statement, and I won't mention names, but suggesting that that was wrong. But that was always going on. And some of the people who would talk at those firesides are now general authorities. Some of their children are now general authorities. And this was really a big part, the discussions, and they were dynamic, and it wasn't about agreement. It wasn't about everyone has to feel this way. So that was a big part of my childhood, that there are contraries, there are paradox, and that we're all experiencing it or avoiding it, dealing with consequences either way. And I saw him wrestle. I think a big example is LGBTQ issues, because very early on, there were students and family members and loved ones that came to him for counsel and direction, and he didn't always know what to say. And he was, for a while, he was trying to work this out, almost like trying to reconcile something. And he wrote about it, but what he was writing about just couldn't reconcile the contradictions. And something that I appreciate is, and this happened only a few years before he died, he and I were flying to Seattle. He was going up to speak at the Affirmation Conference there. I was going up to help my sister who had a new baby. And we were on the plane, and he had me read his address. And I had been reading things over the years. We had loved ones who were gay and had been, a part of our lives and out for many years at that point. But he was still trying to somehow find a way to reconcile this, there was no way for someone who is gay to completely live a fulfilled life according to what he truly saw as crucial, that we can have someone we love in our lives, that we can have a committed relationship, that we can have a family. And he was trying, he kept readdressing it. And I remember reading it, and he was still trying to somehow justify there not being a path to an acknowledged marriage, and kind of still compartmentalize it in a way that would somehow reconcile that. And I remember looking at him, and at that point, I said, Dad, do you really think God is expecting this? And I really appreciated, because I knew I could say that to Dad and he'd listen. There were many times in discussions, and somebody, one of us would say, no, I just, do you really think this is how it is? And it was like this phrase that would bring Dad back to going, am I going with dogma, or am I really willing to look at this? And he had apparently some pretty fascinating discussions at that conference, and he started writing differently about it and acknowledging that this was not an answer to say, you will be lonely. You need to deal with this cross. And so I appreciate him being willing to say, I have been wrong. I'm looking at this more. I don't know what we do with this, but this is not working. So that was an interesting time, and I still wonder what would have happened if he had lived longer. How would he have addressed this, and what would he have done with this? I think it's interesting how there were members and leaders, church leaders, that really loved him, really honored this extraordinary faith of his, but others had no idea what to think. And unfortunately, the only thing they could think of was to try to silence him and remove him. The same year he was awarded Professor of the Year at BYU, there were also efforts by someone else to have him removed. And
Wow.
he was actually told by a high-level administrator that it was nothing, that he hadn't said or done anything that was of concern, but they were worried that he could say or do something that would concern them, so they wanted to get rid of him. And finally, he did. He ended up retiring unwillingly from BYU, and he went to UVU, and he worked really hard and won an unprecedented grant to start the first Mormon Studies program. All the Mormon Studies programs came after that. He started the first one, and he had been trying for decades at BYU to do that. But UVU is where he was able to do that, and just not long before he died. So I learned from that. It's just, this is doing what you feel led to do is not a popularity contest, and it's definitely not something where you have to focus on getting agreement. Sometimes you just focus on what you're committed on. And I think, especially seeing that those types of interactions could occur anywhere, academia, church, activism, family, anywhere. This is not a Mormon problem. This was something where I learned early, people said, well, just, why do you stay connected where something like this happens? And it's going to happen everywhere. It really is. And learning how to live with the contraries, with the dissonance, without needing agreement before you make a difference, but just seeing that it can happen. I wrote an essay, and it's on eugeneengland.org. It's called A Pope Story. And I wrote it not long after, a few years after his death. And he passed away in 2001 of brain cancer. And it was really my expression of realizing how he, the way he made a difference is he created really big problems. So that centered about an event that occurred in 1981. He was one of the directors of a BYU study abroad program in London, and part of that 6 months there, we had Eurail passes, and we traveled around Europe, and we were in Rome for a few days, and before we were going to get on the train to go to Switzerland, one last thing in Rome is we went to the St. Peter's and the piazza there to listen to the Pope give an address. This is Pope John Paul II. And something that we had been watching, this is when Solidarity was going on. And Pope John Paul II, being Polish, he was kind of the spiritual leader of this nonviolent resistance to the communist leaders in Poland. And there had been a lot of pressure on the Solidarity movement. And we were there listening, ready to listen to the Pope give an address, and gathered in the square. And Dad would kind of put me in charge of some of the students before we'd get on the train. And we were gathered in the center, and people had been all over Rome, and they were tired and sitting down on the steps. And I had climbed up on top of one of these pillars to get a good view. And Dad said, "I'm going to go up and try to get closer." And he had a way of doing that. and the Pope came out, drove around in the Jeep facing inward, and then drove around again facing outward before he was going to give his talk. And as he was coming around, and I could kind of see him over the crowd, all of a sudden I heard these pops, and then he kind of disappeared, and there was panic everywhere. And
wow.
This is when he was shot. And the students sitting around me and my siblings and Mom, they kind of looked up, and I said, "I think someone shot the Pope." And I saw the gunman run off to the side, and the people running after him. The Pope's Jeep took off, and there was all this confusion. And so we waited there. There was an announcement that some people in the crowd had also been shot. And all of a sudden we looked at each other and we said, "Where's Dad?" And it was really moving to me, because I saw, like, there were nuns there that were just weeping uncontrollably. And I realized how important, and crucial a moment like this was. And then Dad was there, and the tip of his finger was bleeding, and the side of his head was inflamed. And like right at the moment he had his hand outstretched and the Pope was, reaching out, the bullet went past Dad's temple and clipped the end of his finger before it entered the Pope. And
wow.
So it was really, it was really impactful. But what Dad took from that is he kind of strongly felt that the KGB was behind this. They were trying to remove this spiritual inspiration from this nonviolent resistance, and that there was a need. And what he saw was needed is support for the people who are trying to change the world. And when we went back to Provo, here he is, this professor at a conservative university in a conservative county, and he wanted to find a way to send support to people in Poland. And the only thing he could think of is feed them. And to him, it wasn't, we need to do this so we can get them to join the church. It was like, we need to do this because this is what Christ would do. They are trying to live their life. They are trying to live it without this constant control, and they need food. And in the resistance of trying to negotiate something, what was happening is they were being denied everything in Poland. And so he started something called Food for Poland. We didn't have money. He didn't know anyone. He just started talking. And he kept inviting people to see that this could make a difference in the world. And over time, he got celebrity and endorsements, but not a lot of donations. But people would do everything from bring a can of milk to donate $1,000. Then he started talking to church leaders and government leaders, and for the first time that we know of, the church cooperated with the Catholic Church to try to send shipments. Then he started talking to people in the church to start looking for ways that humanitarian services could be ready to mobilize when there was a need in another part of the world. And it made a difference there. And so humanitarian services shifted some of the things they were doing. And that he saw that something could be done, and he kept telling people about this big problem. Provide food so people can create a good life for themselves without using guns. And that's a big problem, but it's also an inspiring problem. Too often people won't go beyond problems of how am I going to get a nicer car? And that's their biggest problem. But when you create really huge problems, you become inspired and other people want to be a part of that. And so not that many years later, when that wall was torn down, that was a huge deal. I remember sometimes being on the extension line when Dad was talking to leaders of solidarity and saying, what is it you need the most? And hearing them talk about what was happening, I realized this is the path to godhood. Invite people into really huge, huge things. And that's how Dad changed the world. There are so many Mormon publications that he started or had his hand in. There are so many, the Mormon studies programs, and also writings in English literature journals that he wrote. When he was teaching at St. Olaf College in Minnesota, this is a Lutheran college, and students would come up and say, I've never had a teacher like you. You're asking me to pray about the books I'm reading to see how I can be inspired by great literature. I've never had a teacher ask me this. And so letting go of thinking that it can only happen in a certain way, I was deeply inspired at a young age by the 13th Article of Faith. That's pretty cool to see that it doesn't matter where it comes from, but if it's virtuous, lovely, or of good report or praiseworthy, it doesn't need an official stamp on it. We're the ones who can recognize where that is, and then we can do something about it. And this was Dad doing that over and over. And while, he was not perfect or anything, but it was pretty amazing to have him as a mentor. I think something that's been interesting seeing publications about him, these biographies, but also, things have been written off and on about him over the years. And to see how sometimes even people who really admired him, they don't know what to do with why he did it the way he did. And I've actually heard people suggest that he was naive to think that he could keep suggesting or trying to work with church authorities when especially a few of them were really making life difficult for him. It just would not listen and criticizing him, even threatening him. And Dad was not naive. It's hard to understand how deeply committed he was. Because he was deeply committed and dedicated to the gospel of Jesus Christ and the work that he saw could be done by the church in the world. He deeply committed and constantly sought direction and inspiration and wisdom in how to do it. And even if others were afraid of that or didn't respond to it, it did not change that. And so him constantly trying to make a difference through official channels as well as through his writings, that was not naivete. It just wasn't. It was commitment. And again, I learned from that. I've been a part of advocacy groups that have gone from being very dedicated to saving lives to shifting over to being more dedicated to branding and getting donations. And sometimes you have to realize, okay, this does not mean that I have to stop doing what I feel led to do and find other channels to do it. He never gave up on that. That really was, it's something that I experienced not long before we moved from Colorado back to here. A leader who we had served right next to for 10 years, and he had been really appreciative and seemed to be led by inspiration, and something had made him afraid. And he really used every bit of his position to try to control a situation where we really were creating a space for people whose lives depended on it. And he didn't want that. And it's devastating. It was really devastating. And but these moments with God that I had, where I just felt God sitting with me, not justifying anything, not telling me I had to do anything, just sitting with me and my pain and feeling a betrayal. And I realized that Dad experienced this a lot. And doing what was so clearly something to express love and belonging to people. And someone used their position because they were afraid or didn't understand, whatever. And it was a wrestle at that time because one person, because of the actions, she almost didn't make it through that way. Her despair was too much to see people that she had relied on removed. And one of the things that I really heard from God, it was, your greatest calling will never be something that comes from another person. You will know the greatest work you need to do when, in each moment, you have the opportunity to do that. And no matter where you go, no matter what building you're in, no matter what meeting you're in, I'm with you. And if you're willing to show up wherever you show up, I'm with you. And that's not always easy, because there are a lot of times I just want to not show up. People have the ability to use their position. They do. And I'm not just talking about church communities. People want to control what they don't understand. And it happens everywhere. But Dad was one of the people who brought that wall down. And it took millions of people doing what they do to bring walls down. And Dad was one of them. He didn't live long enough to see some of the things I don't know if he could have. I think he did imagine that there could be Mormon studies programs everywhere, and that some of them would be completely based on belonging and creating peace in the world. Maybe he did. I don't know. But he did it anyway, whether he could see results or not. So that was, that's had an effect on me. His writings really reveal he was willing to be very raw with some of his writings. They were personal essays. He was willing to reveal his wrestle. There are a lot of paradoxes of faith and intelligence, dedication, even when it's hard. Over and over, he talks about this human experience towards divinity, and it's messy. It's deep wounds. The ministry is about sitting with each other in the pain, not having the answer that's going to get rid of the pain, and where that leads you. This just doesn't fit into an easily marketed message, and yet that is the essence, I think, of gospel work on the earth. I think it's what Christ calls us into. Inevitably, in an organization, you have to market, you have to brand. That's just the nature of it. And I think we need to learn an understanding that an organization can take care of that administrative, that organization part, and the part that draws us, that brings us into it, is the ministering, the messy part, the part that cannot be packaged. I have to tell you, I'm an artist. I really appreciate visual things, and so when a logo is changed to something that's limiting, it really riles me. At the same time, realizing, okay, that's that part of it, and the essence really is, how is it that we treat each other, and how do we create belonging? And that ultimately has to be up to each member to overcome whatever, we're going to make this look good. We're going to convince people that they have to be there. And over here, the real experience is people come where they feel loved. People come where they want to be. You don't have to talk anyone into being where they feel loved. So if you create that place of being, and it happens to be in the church house, people are going to fill them up. If you create a sense of being needed and wanted, and it's a really messy service project, people are going to show up. Human beings are starving for that. And seeing how Dad could invite people to see that this is a place where you will experience that, or where people need that. And so they would come and do things they never thought they would do. It's pretty extraordinary. I think some of his essays are more pertinent than ever. I've heard a number of people say, the talks I used to listen to from General Conference just don't talk to me anymore. But your dad's essay, I see something new there that's now pertinent in my life. This essay here was exactly what I needed. There was this great, it was Patrick Mason's book, Planted, that came out 6 years ago, and I'd been sent an advance copy, and it was during a really tough time for me with some fellow ward members, and I did not even realize it until I opened it. He had a chapter on Dad, and then also at the time, I read a blog entry by Boyd Peterson about the future of the church is Eugene England's vision, and talking about, some of the things that were valuable for him that he was reading and learning from things Bruce R. McConkie had said. But then as he was moving into other things, he realized the future is alive and not restricted. And that's what he had gotten from Dad's writing. So these things that happen where I see people breathing deeper, because I think that's how we became children of God. It wasn't a biological process because we've coexisted with God as long as God has existed. This is another really amazing thing about the restoration gospel. It wasn't a biological process. It was an inspirational process. They breathed life into us by inviting us into a deeper existence. And that the most powerful way we can multiply and replenish the earth is by inspiring people to breathe deeper, to live more fully. And that's the godlike process of multiplying and replenishing. And I say that as someone who has given birth and has been deeply impacted by that process, but to narrow down our vision of what multiplying and replenish is to something that a definite minority of the people who have lived on this earth can really experience, is really to deny the essential God part of us and how our heavenly parents really gave us life. They invited us and inspired us, breathed life into us to live on this journey that takes us to a new level. Even knowing that it could involve great pain, but it could only work if we wanted to be a part of it and if we wanted to turn to each other and help each other make it through that. That is greater life. That's deeper breathing. That's more fulfilling existence. And I think that's the life that Dad continues to bring. You know, you can read what he wrote. Some of his talks were recorded. I think one of the most moving was the last talk he gave at BYU. It's really incredible to hear him, to listen to that, and to see what is this. Is this bringing more breath to my thoughts, my options, what I'm willing to take on, how I'm willing to live? And in a sense, it's what keeps happening, even in the moments of deepest pain and betrayal. Being willing to see that God is sitting right there, breathing with me, helping me see it a deeper way to go through this. Not just see it as someone hurt me, they should hurt. Someone hurt me, they're wrong. But just this existence of sitting with, being one with, experiencing with. I don't think the atonement is about paying back. I think the atonement, and Dad taught me this phrase very early on, is it's an experience of at-one-ment. The power to transform us is that Christ became one with us. Not to pay any scale back, but to have the experience of getting our existence is greater when we get it's with and through everyone. We are one with God. And to experience with each other causes us to want to love, to want to connect, to be one and care that what happens to anyone happens to all of us. And that kind of at-one-ment is deeply inspiring to lead me on. So his words encourage that to me, sometimes at a great cost. But time after time, the cost ends up being something that is fleeting. So going to, and I'm not going to lie, it's been hard to realize, well, if I continue with this may mean that I won't get recognition or approval from official channels or something. And I'm not, that can be really tough. That can be really tough. And there is really something that time after time God keeps leading me into. Breathe deeper with me. And especially when there is someone who is on the verge of not wanting to take another breath. And I'm willing to say, I would rather tell you and be a voice that says you belong as much as the person behind the biggest podium in the world. And that would be enough to cause them to want to keep breathing. Sometimes those things are worth it. So that influence continues.
This is kind of sacred ground, listeners, for me to hear Jody talk about her experiences, her insights, and also to talk about her father, who's been gone for 21 years, born in 1933, would be 89. If he were alive, he would be very much a part of our community and would have another 2 decades of writing, and I'm mourning his loss. And but I'm grateful that his voice continues. Even talking, I feel like, takes away from the spirit. And I just, a few things I wrote down, listeners, that as I heard, I'll just read about 4 or 5 paragraphs or sentences that Jody shared. Activism was inherently connected to faith and dedicated to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Dad took me to my first rally when I was 8. If you saw a problem, especially one that was causing problems or injustice for people as followers of Christ, you needed to heed the call and make a difference. And I just love the home you grew up in. And I recognize that I sense more of our Gen Z and millennials are wired that way. I don't know if anybody has done the research on this, but I just sense this is why I'm so high. In a way, your dads and you are Gen Zs and millennials with your worldview and the things you want to make different. And I just look at our younger members of the church in general and the community members in general, just wanting to make the world a better place and deeply connected to social issues, and their lens, the way they view the gospel of Jesus Christ is, what is it doing for the most marginalized people in my circle? And how can I help them belong? You've used that word over and over again. And so both of you are sort of ahead of your time in that, but consistent with Christ. So you're just following Christ's example. But I also recognize that the dissonance your father, if that's the right word, allowed to have in you, has given you tools to navigate dissonance your whole life. And I'm thoughtful of Latter-day Saints that are leaving our church. And I don't want to paint a broad brush, but I wonder sometimes in my morning walks if we'd give them the better tools to manage dissidence or manage paradoxes, if they would have the tools to stay. Because I think a lot have a fundamental testimony of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, but just don't know how to handle that. And I remember my personal story is really growing up with no dissidence. So I grew up different than Jody. I grew up in the same city. My father's a couple years older than you and alive, and I'm sensitive to the fact that my father's been alive and yours hasn't. And that's a whole nother discussion on why that happens for some people and doesn't. But I didn't grow up with any dissonance. And the dissonance started when I had priesthood responsibility for a couple of gay men in a YSA ward. And then God sort of said, you've just let straight people tell you about gay people. Got to listen to gay people tell you about gay people, and sort of listen to the complexity of their situation, just like your dad way back in 1998 was thinking and talking about this, and that created dissonance. And many of you that are LGBTQ or connected to that, or parents, feel that same dissonance. And I always thought the goal, Jody, and this is why you helped me and continue to help me, the goal is to get back to no dissonance. And you just laughed. And I think that's one of the powers of this podcast. And your dad's work is maybe the goal isn't to get back to no dissonance.
Yeah.
And your journey forward as a Latter-day Saint isn't what my journey for the first decades of my life was, no dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm grateful for the paradox and the dissonance. Sometimes I want to go back to that earlier stage, but sometimes I don't, because I can reach people in a way that I never could have reached before. And I know there's just, with all the work you're doing suicide prevention training. I think you're doing that later today. All the circles you're in, or this weekend or something.
Yeah.
There's just a stream of people reaching out to you because they need the tools you have, and they can talk to you about real things to help them manage the dissonance in their life, and how that's a needed skill within our faith community. So those of you that are in this stage of dissonance, are younger and may not have the long view that Jody and your father have, I think there's principles. Let me just mention a couple others, then I'm going to get back. Then getting agreement, being focused on what you're committed to do. I thought that was a really good one. The goal isn't necessarily
agreement makes no difference. Disagreement makes no difference. Commitment is what makes a difference.
That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Support for people trying to change the world. I wrote that down. I can't remember the context of that. Your greatest call will never come from another person. That's pretty powerful. I don't want to do anything diminish sort of LDS tools callings, because those are incredibly needed.
Very much needed. Yeah.
But there's often things we're all called to do and ways to serve that are outside an LDS tools calling. And maybe even an LDS cool calling doesn't infer it's come from another person because it comes from God. But I think this sort of things we feel called to do that can be labeled as activism and felt with judgment in our faith community can be really wonderful things to change people's lives.
Well, for instance, one of my callings is I'm editor of the Ward newsletter. And I received that calling the month before the shutdown for the pandemic.
Wow.
And and all of a sudden there were no church meetings, there were no announcements to put in there. But my greater calling is for people to find belonging and connection. So I thought, people are going to get this newsletter whether they go to church or not. And people need to feel connected more than anything. This is a big shift for a lot of people. So I listened to that part of the calling because it definitely wasn't anything that was expected with the basic Ward newsletter. And I just heeded a calling to help people connect. And I just used that as one of the tools. Community resources, meeting out on your front porch, just any number of things to communicate, look, we're still here and we still need to connect and know that we can turn to each other. You do not need to wait until someone else tells you how to do that. You can seek and look for direction and information as to how to make that happen, no matter what you're calling. No matter what. And same type of thing. I was an ordinance worker in the Denver temple and then in the Salt Lake temple until it closed for remodel. And that is as you know, it's a wonderful opportunity to just be someone that clears everything out of the way so people can have their own experience. Too often people feel like, well, I won't know what kind of experience to have until someone tells me. I need to hear what it means. I need to hear what to think. I need to hear what I'll get. And my grandpa was in the temple presidency when that annex was being built in the 60s. And he took me into the construction, and he talked about the temple from the time I was a child, that this is spiritual theater. This is where you go through a journey every single time and see what symbols tell you about where you are. He never, and this is how it was taught for his generation, for my dad's, for part of mine. I remember stake presidents bringing this up in college wards about the symbolism and the journey that you go on, and the opportunity to just let the symbolism teach you individually, and that they would never say, this is what you're supposed to feel, this is what you're supposed to think, because that's not how ritual works. And so as a worker, I really was there to just clear all distractions out of the way so the person could have their own experience. It was an amazing opportunity. I mourn the loss of the live session every single day, every day, because of that. It's really hard for me, but I see the value of that. I had young people that I taught it in youth programs, and they'd come to me and go, I know I'm supposed to go on a mission. I know it. But how am I going to make it through the temple? How am I going to do that? For various reasons. They didn't like what they were told. This is something I appreciate about Dad. If we just respect young people, instead of telling them what to think, ask them, what kind of experience are you having? What do you want to share with me? What are you looking for? Instead of, well, you need to, you should. So I'd listen to young people who were not going to go through the temple. And I just told them basic stuff about how symbolic ritual works. I said, don't worry about what's true. Don't worry about what you're supposed to think. Just see what's there for you. That's all. And they're still going. This is 10 years later. They're still going. And they'll tell me, they'll say, I have a love-hate relationship with the temple. Sounds perfect. Sounds absolutely perfect. A ritual is there for you to learn. And there are enough things in life that are difficult and wounding and harmful. I think we can go a long way to stop doing that with our fear. If we can listen to people about where they're struggling and hurting and say, I'm here with you. That must be hard. I don't have an answer. And you're on a journey and I'm on a journey. Maybe we can just remind each other we're not alone. That respects people to find their way through something.
Will you tell our listeners the names of these two biographies that were written last year, the author and the names?
So Terryl Givens, it's Stretching the Heavens. And Kristine Haglund, it's Eugene England, a Mormon Liberal. And I think both of them are valuable. People say, which is your favorite? And I go, there could be 50 biographies of Dad, and each one would have something valuable. And each of these is different and has something of value. And so I highly recommend both of them. I've been rereading Kristine's lately and really kind of caught up in that but I really think they're both valuable. One thing that I find interesting about Stretching the Heavens is it really is Terryl giving his perspective on Dad's life, which I think is an important one. He's dealing with some really interesting experiences in how he observes that. Kristine is also sharing so much about Dad's writing and his process for that. And I just find that really very valuable to read.
You've done this already, but I'm back to my millennial friends and Gen Z friends and there's other people, I'm a baby boomer listening, that are trying to figure out a way to stay in the church with the dissonance they feel on XXX issue. And I'm sure you've had hundreds of these conversations, and you've already sort of done this, but just general principles in closing you'd give to someone that says, my goal is actually to find an authentic way to stay in the church. I just can't reconcile this, or this. So I'm not sure I can stay.
I don't like the word stay.
Good. Yeah.
I don't think that aligns with what I find inspiring about the gospel at all. I I keep coming back to create and move forward. So a lot of times people think, well, if I'm
that's
moving,
really powerful, by the way, what you just said. Thank you.
I don't find much value in feeling like you've got to stay, because
move forward I love that so much better than staying.
Well, and unfortunately, a lot of times people assume, well, if I'm moving forward, I'm leaving my community. Well, I don't know, but to me, no matter what community or group I'm involved in, it involves me creating an experience and a journey. And a journey involves moving forward. And I see involvement in any community as being something that requires you to be a part of how that community is created. And the greatest things that I've experienced in my church community all throughout my life have not been because a single entity that is somehow seen as monolithic and only says or does one thing. It occurs because of the individuals that make up that community. And I'm one of them. And just as someone might it's really tough for me to keep coming back to, please remember each person is doing the best they can. Even though I see sometimes what people are doing are causing tremendous harm. We cannot make a difference without sharing our stories. We cannot make a difference without creating an experience in whatever way we create that in the community. Now, I'm not saying the only way to do that is to stay involved in the way you've always been involved. I am saying consider there are new ways for you to be a part of any community. Only you can see how to create that. How I am involved in participating in my community, any community, including the church today, is not what it was yesterday or last year or 10 years ago. And it is not what it will be tomorrow. That's what creation is. And in fact, this was a discussion in a Sunday school class recently. Really, really, really great Sunday school teacher. I've had the worst ever Sunday school teachers, and I've had really phenomenal Sunday school teachers. But he was saying, why do you come to church? And again, there were the textbook answers, just like, you need to, you promise to, and all this. And I said, yeah, I get that. I don't feel the need to. I'm not doing it because I promise you, because I don't feel inspired by that. I come for the adventure. Because the person I say I want to be is someone who is not buffeted by someone being different from me or something. But that requires practice. To really own and create my own journey does not happen in a vacuum. And showing up at church where some pretty complex things and diverse opinions are expressed about deeply seated thoughts is a great adventure in practicing. Can I see God in this person?
Wow.
Can I invite the experience of Christ in this place? And sometimes it's sublime. It's pretty incredible what's invited when I see some people share a wrestle and a burden. And inherently people rally and hold them up, knowing there are differences. That's an adventure. When something happens where it's just really, really tough, and I might need to walk out of the room. And then someone is in the hall who's weeping and doesn't know how they're going to make it through the day. And all I get to do is just stand there and hug them. I don't know what's going on. That's an adventure. But it's not the way it was in the past. So I don't stay. And I think young people really want to create.
Agreed.
And in them is the power to completely transform. We need to step away from thinking our faith experience or our faith community has to be transactional, which means check it off. Do this and check it off and get this. Transforming is a deeply mindful, Christ-like. I mean, what's more transformative than being taken down from a cross dead and presenting yourself as alive later? Christ invites us to transform over and over and over. And that's not staying, that's creating. And I would love to see, clearly there are going to be times when it's just like, oh gosh, I can't do this today. That's fine. That's fine. But I think if we can practice in our communities, because I think faith communities are places to practice. They are not the end. Not once am I ever thinking that when we're greeted somewhere here or in the next life, God is ever going to say, how many times did you go to sacrament meeting? At all. I don't think that's it. I think it's a really great place to practice and have an adventure in transforming. And that's my invitation. I don't care how young you are, what generation you are. That's my invitation. Practice creation.
Well, listeners, we're signing off, even though I don't want to. And I think Jody could come on another podcast and just feed us. I'm so glad we did this, Jody. I'm personally fed. I've learned things. I will forever reframe the question, how do I stay versus how do I move forward and how do I create? There's so much more power in that. There's so much more thoughtfulness in that. It's so much more my ability to grow the community. That was a beautiful segment. I wish your dad were here to hear you. I'm tenderhearted for your dad who's not here. Maybe he can hear you. Maybe he's very aware of the work you're doing and it brings him great peace. I think of people on the other side of the veil and I know he misses you and the rest of his posterity, but I have to think you honor him with your personal life, the things you're doing, the lives you're saving, and it's great peace to him to see. I think one of the greatest gifts we give to people that are gone is that we remember them by the way we live our lives and the principles that we've been taught. We then bless other people through the things, and that may be one of the greatest gifts you're giving your good father. Listeners will link to both of these biographies by Kristine Haglund and Terryl Givens about Eugene England. We'll also check out eugeneengland.org. But on behalf of all of our listeners, Jody, thank you for this podcast.
Thank you for having me. This is a pleasure.
So Richard Osler and Jody England Hansen signing off from another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.